Hello, protocols, packets, and programs. It's time for a 6-month checkup. It's June, after all. Back in January, I set a desire to see cliches expire and instead see designs against vuln classes and secure defaults for the masses that give us a better solution to reduce our AppSec noise pollution. Which means this week we chat with Luis Villa about the social and economic side of supporting open source projects. No news segment this week. Instead, we have 2 short interviews recorded at this year's RSA conference. Look ahead and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show to learn the latest tools and techniques to understand DevOps, applications, and the cloud. Your trusted source for the latest AppSec news. It's time for Application Security Weekly.
Imperva, a Thales company, is the cybersecurity leader that helps organizations protect critical applications, APIs, and data anywhere, at scale, and with the highest ROI. With an integrated approach combining edge, application security, and data security, Imperva protects companies through all stages of their digital journey. Imperva Threat Research and their global intelligence community enable Imperva to stay ahead of the threat landscape and seamlessly integrate the latest security, privacy, and compliance expertise into their solutions. Start a free trial today at securityweekly.com/Imperva. This is episode 287, recorded June 3rd, 2024. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with John Kinsella. Hello, John.
Mike Shima, it's good to see you as always.
Good to see you as well. And we also get to see Akira this week. Hello, Akira.
Hello, Mike. How are you?
Doing quite well. We're hosting a podcast on another Monday morning. Doesn't get any better than this. The only way it could get better is if you dove into cybersecurity with Cyber Risk Alliance for exclusive insights from RSA Conference 2024. Explore executive interviews with industry leaders and curated articles on trends and innovations. For all of that and more, visit securityweekly.com/RSAC. I know that was super exciting for you, Akira. Luis is a co-founder at Tidelift and board member at Creative Commons and OpenET. During his career, he has been a top open source lawyer, a programmer, and a community manager. In previous roles, he has worked in the legal departments at the Wikimedia Foundation and Mozilla, and served on community-elected boards at the Open Source Initiative and GNOME Foundation. Hello, Luis. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, great to be here this morning.
It's wonderful to have you here. You might be the first lawyer that we've had join the podcast, which I say, yes, exactly, raise the roof. I say that with kindness and a lot of interest, because we're going to talk about a little bit of legal stuff, a lot of pain stuff, and maybe even some AppSec. But one of the things we brought you here to talk to us about is the open source software supply chain. Everybody's going to fall asleep as I say that because, wow, it's been talking about it last year, the year before, it's security, but the angle here is about how do we support maintainers? And so maybe just give us a little bit of, introduction, perhaps Tidelift, or sort of your reason for being, I shall say, succinctly.
So Tidelift is the company I co-founded almost 7 years ago now with 3 other folks from across that range. So I'm the lawyer. I'm a programmer turned lawyer. Mm-hmm. Our CEO, Donald, is a programmer turned MBA. Our head of product, Havoc Pennington, is I think he was a philosophy major, but, made a mistake somewhere along the way, became a programmer, and then got really interested in design questions. Mm-hmm. And then Jeremy, who's our CTO, was a programmer, got an MBA, but was like, nah, screw that, and went right back to programming. But the common thread for all of us is that we've been working in open source since the late 90s. And we, especially for Donald and I, a lot of our career around 7 to 10 years ago was being centered around open source projects that were struggling to figure out how to make this into how to transition from being a project into being a career. So Donald was in venture capital, and a lot of his job was literally, get these pitch decks of, I'm going to turn my open source project into a VC-backed company. And his job was in part to sit down and say, as soon as you take VC money, you're gonna have to stop doing the fun parts of open source, and you're gonna have to start building a sales team, building the SaaS equivalent, building the proprietary modules, whatever it is that's going to drive revenue. And I was at the other side of that pipeline. As an attorney, I was advising a lot of VC-backed open source companies on, so you're not so sure about that open source thing now. Like, how do you wriggle? I was providing a mix of business and legal advice of how do you draw a line around the community and around the open software code base so that you can make a living off of whatever's on the other side of that line. And it was not a very satisfying, we were both good at it, but it was not, we were chatting and it was just not a very satisfying way to go around. So we had this idea of, what if there was a better way to do this? We know we weren't using the supply chain terminology at the time, but there were these two ends. Now we would say it as there are these two ends of the supply chain, right? Up at the top, you've got literally trillions of dollars of value being created. And down at the bottom, you've got folks on the other end of an issue tracker. And there's this very, I think unlike other supply chains, when the federal government says, hey, we're going to require you to use a higher grade of steel in your screws for our tanks. Well, the way that happens is they set the rules at the top. The money flows down one way, and the better quality of metal flows up the supply chain the other way, right?
Yeah.
And that set of links is broken in open source. So Tidelift, when you're talking about in the supply chain context, is how do we flow the money all the way down from where all that value is being created so that quality flows back up.
Yeah, and you gave us a couple paths that we'll go down on the Gov side and how to get the money to the developers and even how they would want to consume it. These are lots of questions that came to my mind as I was thinking about this. But I want to say, you've got that good pedigree, you and the team within open source. I want to also start to sort of build the case for why maybe you don't need too much convincing, but why these maintainers need such support. How have you seen the responsibilities for maintainers even change in the past, 5 years, let alone the past 20 years? And here I'm thinking of things like security, but other things that just make this a bigger responsibility for them.
Well, it's twofold. So one is simply, as you say, lots more responsibilities, right? One of my, when we started doing open source, the idea that you needed a security contact, there was literally a security mailing list for all the Linux distros where notes were shared on we found a vulnerability over here, we found a vulnerability over there. Now there's this expectation that every single project should have a security contact, should have a security response policy. And if you're just doing this for fun, one, you might not even know that there's that expectation. Two, when you do find out there's that expectation, it's I gotta what? And, fun, yeah. And that's a big, that expectation is not unreasonable, but at the same time, it's pretty onerous if this is something you think you're doing on the side and suddenly the Department of Defense or the world's largest banks want to be able to contact you on the weekend or during the workday. That's just a big, there's a lot of responsiveness concerns. There's a lot of, policies across the spectrum. There's sort of this expectation that you should have a code of conduct now that governs how you interact in your, how you interact in your project spaces, like your issue tracker. On the licensing and legal side, which is part of how I came into this, we went from this expectation that you'll have a license file that is more or less machine parsable. And, but if it's not machine parsable, it's fine, whatever, not a big deal. Because somebody will read it and figure it out. That was when you had, you could literally talk about the LAMP stack. You could say, it's your Linux distro and then 3 other things on top of that. And now our average customer has about 5,000 packages installed, not counting their Linux distro, right? And yeah, Akira, that is the big eyes, like, is a regular feature of our work, because it's just, we take this stack for granted, and it's sort of crept up on us, right?
Yeah,
like,
and let's dive into that, because that, Linux, there's a lot of distros, but the Linux kernel, tons of support there. Apache, that's the A, the M, MySQL, P for PHP, pretty large projects. But of these 5,000, I'm pretty sure they're going to be tiny. So let's talk about that money part. How do you funnel money not to the Apache Foundation, to MySQL or Oracle, whoever owns them now? These are maintainers who maybe the government says, well, we need to give you money, or a company says, well, we don't want to give you money, except maybe we'll be nice and donate it to you. And there's a lot of terminology here that has a lot of implications for how the maintainer might respond. So I'm not sure where to start. So this is why we have you here. Tell us, where's the money equation?
I mean, the good news for you, Mike, is that nobody's really sure where to start. Like, this is still a discussion that's very much, even though we've been at it for 7 years, it's very evolving. Your instincts are correct. Up at the top of the stack, there's a lot of well-known, well-branded projects, but they're like 10, 20, maybe 50 out of those 5,000, right? And then there's a bunch of anonymous things that mostly you can just sort of carefully, happily use until one day you wake up and you're like, what is XZ? I've never heard of XZ before. What is LeftPad? I've never heard of LeftPad before. You hear about them after the bad thing has happened. So our model is we analyze what packages our customers are using, and, across the whole base of customers. And we seek out the most widely used small packages, essentially, within those, because that's where you have the most literally bang for your buck. And so we reach out to those packages, and we find those maintainers, and we say, hey, you're being used by a lot of our customers. We would like to write you a monthly paycheck, not a donation, not a grant. And in exchange, you're going to agree to to have a security response policy, like we just talked about, to clean up your licensing if it's a mess.
Well, and before you get too far on that, I don't want to jump over the part where you said, like, we're going to give you a paycheck to do this. And you said not a donation, not a grant. Why, why that distinction? Is that important? Or why did you make that distinction?
We made that distinction for a couple of reasons. One, we want to give our customers the sense that this is an ongoing obligation, right? Too many open source grant projects. There are times when grants are appropriate, right? But, we've seen that work in a few interesting scenarios. But by and large, if you're giving a grant, it's essentially sort of a thank you. Okay, and then what? Because your company is going to be depending on this for 5, 10. We have customers who regularly have 20-year-old Java packages. So a one-time grant is not buying. I mean, it might maybe buy you 20 years of goodwill, but like goodwill does not feed a programmer, right? It doesn't pay for their vacations. And so we want to make clear to everybody involved that this is a long-term commitment on both sides.
So when you guys set up that arrangement with these projects, what's that contract term look like? Is that like a month to month, or is it like a year, 5 years, or what?
It is month to month, because maintainers by and large are a little, this isn't their day job. Mostly isn't their day job. There are actually a few maintainers who we pay enough that it is actually their day job. Not a small number, but we'd like it to be a larger number. And
I get that I'm not trying to gotcha you with the 1 month, right? I understand also you're a startup, and if you have a multi-year deal, that's not going to work out well for you guys in some cases. But I was just very curious, but I'm going to keep going forward. This is a slight aside, but I'm really curious your thoughts on this. In a way, what we're talking about feels like something a government could be doing.
Yeah. I mean, it is a collective action problem. The U.S. government is, in fact, one of our biggest customers at Tidelift, because there are people there who get building for the long term. Whatever else you might say about the U.S. federal government, there's definitely a lot of sense of like, we need this stuff to last. And in fact, I just interviewed and will be publishing Wednesday, so 2 days after we're recording this. The German federal government has a small project along these lines called the Sovereign Tech Fund. And I interviewed for Tidelift's upcoming Upstream conference the co-founder of the Sovereign Tech Fund, and they are thinking of it. They see themselves as sort of a pilot project, right? They would be the first to tell you that it's too small, how much money they're spending. But yeah, it does, it's a problem that impacts an industry that is the underpinning of the modern economy. So you're not
no small goal there. Yeah. I don't expect. Again, not to try and make this look bad. I don't think you guys are going away anytime soon. I don't imagine that happening, particularly in the U.S. as a federal program. You never know, but it's just interesting to think about. In a perfect world, how would we be taking care of our security and our RS bombs and all these dependency chains? What would that look like? And we're not there, so happily you're around, but that's just sort of interesting to think about.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting to think about. And I think that's one of the things. There are some ways, there's some predictions that we made when we were starting the company. Obviously, when you start a company, you're making a bet about the shape of the future. And we were already seeing grumblings from maintainers, right? Even then, even 7-8 years ago, I'm being asked to do so much. I am burning out at the edges. I mean, that was foreseen, right? And I think we foresaw correctly that security was going to be a big part of that story, right? That there would be abandonware, there would be these kinds of vulnerabilities. I don't think we understood, or we didn't quite foresee how much, the idea that there would be White House summits on software security, that was not. I think if you'd said well, what do you think? Do you think I would be yeah, okay, that would be possible. But it was definitely not something that was super. And so I mean, to get back to your question, I don't know, but I am surprised at how much the federal government has already done. We'll also have some folks from CISA at Upstream. They'll be interviewed by my CEO, Donald. And, I mean, that's, again, I would not have expected Homeland Security to have a whole team of very smart people devoted to this problem. So
part of that's still on this theme. Talking about government, this is software, open source, much like infrastructure. Perhaps perhaps our roads. I'm not sure. I'm not going to go down the road of metaphors there. Sorry. But there's also a difference between supporting the Linux kernel, something that is going to be on drones, on everything, on ships, etc., versus this little, this PyPy package or this NPM package. So if the government is also even talking about, regulation for IoT, regulation perhaps for open source, or putting on these burdens, there's got to be a very different burden for a Mozilla, a Linux kernel than there is for, one guy, one gal maintaining their favorite project that just becomes that XKCD, stick.
I mean, the problem that you mentioned that XKCD. Listeners, I promise I didn't set them up with this. We pretty much last year we had to tell speakers you can't use that. You can't use that because otherwise everybody will use that XKCD comic. We actually commissioned a couple of new comics about the same problem this year. So you see those from Force Brazil. What was I? I think that's a real genuine problem that society as a whole is going to have to grapple with. Because the problem is the security vulnerabilities in those small packages are just as real as the security vulnerabilities in the Linux kernel, right? If anything, maybe more real because fewer eyeballs on these small packages. So just because they're small doesn't mean that they're not deeply problematic. I suspect we might see some consolidation. We're already sort of nudging some of our maintainers in that direction of hey, why don't you partner with these folks up and down near you in the stack so that you can do things have I almost said 2 eyes, 4 eyes on patch reviews, things like that. Right?
I guess one of my questions, Luis, is like, how would you address the problem of overregulation, as it were, for like these smaller projects that maybe are subject to the same regulatory guidelines as these huge projects, but there's just not enough personnel to handle it, even as they are consolidating. But the regulations like, no, you have to get this done now, and they just don't have the bandwidth.
Totally fair question. The European Union passed recently the Cyber Resilience Act, which is essentially like the first much broader, more proactive regulation of cybersecurity that will apply to basically any product that contains open source, which is to say, virtually everything with a switch at this point. And the draft that they had in like March of last year would have treated the Linux kernel and every solo maintainer exactly the same. And even the Linux kernel, it was going to be problematic for them because the nature of the regulation was such that I'm forgetting now exactly the details, but it would have been very difficult even for the Linux kernel to comply because of some tensions between the regulation and the way the GPL is structured, the general public license. So there was a very concerted effort lobbying in Brussels by the Eclipse Foundation, led first by the Eclipse Foundation. Linux Foundation pitched in later. Open Forum Europe is a group that sort of gathers together a lot of open developers. It's been changed a lot. Interestingly, Mozilla, Akira, you mentioned Mozilla, and Mozilla was at that table, but Mozilla sees themselves correctly as an end user facing project that has to think about, like, they sort of like, we don't love this, but bring it on. Like, it's the right thing. But they have, of course, resources that a lot of projects don't have, right? And so there was a little bit of, this is one of these things we talk about open source, but open source is so huge these days that it really does cover a broad spectrum of interests. Anyway, that concern is a real one. We will also be talking a little bit about that. We'll be talking with the Linux Foundation's lead lobbyist on this issue in the same interview group chat with the Sovereign Tech Fund about how Europe is approaching this from a government perspective. It's hard, right? I mean, there's no right answer because the thing is, some of these regulations, some of them are going to be dumb, either government overreach or government not understanding the problem space. But some of them are like real, like if you have a severe vulnerability, you really should fix it or at least tell people that is not there. And that's, I think, one of those things that maybe we're going to see in the future, at least for more downloaded projects. Folks are going to feel some pressure to like team up and not let it be a solo project as long as, as long as it used to be, right? There's sort of a long tradition.
Yeah, and let's talk about those solo projects, as we did. I veered us into that the behemoths of the kernel or Mozilla, but there's all these even mentioned LeftPad. That could be the table flip. I'm going to take my toys and go home, kind of thing. A reaction to basically the naming of packages. And there's also some, I can't remember the specific example, but there's a PyPy package owner that didn't want to do the multi-factor authentication when that platform was coming out and said, I'm going to unpublish, and so somebody take it over. So there's individuals who just maybe not just purely walk away from money, but how does this what does it look like from a small package maintainer's perspective to say, I've got some money. How bad are these strings attached to me? Is this helpful? As well as the third part question. So I'm going to ask a lot so that you can just start talking. How do we even get the money too? If they want in the first place.
Right. Yeah. I mean, getting the money is a very hard one, John. I do think in the long term, because of this roads and bridges analogy, there's a sort of famous big report called Roads and Bridges that builds that analogy. And there's recently a Harvard Business School study saying that literally the value to the economy is on par with like the electrical grid or the road grid. And the idea that we would do those without government assistance, you'd say like, well, that's bonkers. And whereas, we're coming at it from the flip side in open source, like, what? You want government to get involved? Like that but the value is such that's going to be hard to avoid. I could give a whole lecture on the bringing money in part, but suffice to say, I mean, businesses are becoming more aware. They're using all this stuff. They got to support it. To the question of what are the strings attached for us, we make sure that all the strings attached are, reasonable, expected, right? Like two-factor authentication, or if they're things like the security policies, we have templates and we can actually be your backstop. Like you can, if you partner with us, security@tidelift.com can be the first line of response for that stuff so that we can work to both screen out the stuff that's not actually worth troubling you and to work with you to assemble a proper CVE and things like that. Because that's not something that's reasonable. You can't just say like, well, if you take our money, you have to magically teach yourself how to file a proper CVE. Like that doesn't make sense, right? So instead, we have our in-house experts on that, and so we work with the maintainers to actually get that done. They're the experts in their code base. We're the experts in that other stuff, and we found that partnership, as much as anything else, helps maintainers sleep better at night, right? Like, because they know that stuff's out there. They don't want to be. They have a sense of pride in their work. I think that's an important thing. When we started this, some people got the sense like, oh, you're sort of insulting open source maintainers that they wouldn't want to do this unless they're paid. And it's like, no. We love these maintainers. We realize they have so much pride that this is a source of stress and anxiety. And we don't want them, again, and Akira, to your point about like, Mozilla has a security team, right? Like and we, in some sense, are that security team for small maintainers. That's part of the sort of package that we put together. Because if it was just a paycheck, I mean, there's still a lot of people who'd happily take the paycheck. But like when we provide that wrap together, and in the long term, we'd love to do things like offer benefits, offer vacation, right? So that you can go on vacation and you come back and your issue tracker is cleaned up instead of, gotten better instead of gotten worse, which is, of course, so often the poor guy who had the XZ thing was when he was like hiking in the mountains or something, and he came back and he was a global celebrity. Not how you want your vacation to go.
I'm curious, are you seeing more demand on supply side or demand side? In other words, so is it the open source? Who's more interested in what you guys are doing, the corps or the open source communities?
Well, yes, the side that gets the money, not the side that spends the money. Not.
I could see the side that I mean, the pain point, right? That's a pretty strong pain point. So I could see people wanting to throw money at it.
The challenge with the pain point, and this, John, gets to your question about government versus, is that there's an old saying in sales that it's easier to sell aspirin than insurance. And we're more on the insurance side, right? We can tell, I think, a very good story that, with like this JavaScript, Mike, you mentioned the PyPI that was deleted. It was actually JavaScript, but the same principle applies, right? We can tell a story about how we help prevent that kind of thing from happening. But it is still there's always this scramble at the CTO level of like, well, which things do I know the names of? It's like, well, you knew about XZ afterwards. You knew about LeftPad afterwards. And so that can be a hard sell. Obviously, every time there's another wave of this kind of story, we get more interest and more attention.
Well, do you also see that aspect of, because we're talking about, small package maintainers, but there's also, even mentioning XZ, I'll just touch on that in the aspect of this was also somebody who was, it sounded like, going through their own issues, was kind of like, I'll phrase it as, losing interest in continuing to be a maintainer, which leads to more generally just there are abandoned packages or you couldn't pay me enough to go back. My life has moved on, for example. How does that play into either who the heck do I even pay for this package to support it?
Well, there's actually a pretty interesting experiment going on now, a company called Hero Devs, that one of the nice things about Tidelift is that we're very excited when our partnered maintainers have other, have new ventures, like to us, that's a success story. We help them bridge to something cool. So Hero Devs is trying to figure out a story around this, these older unmaintained packages, but also simply, this is one of these things with the average unmaintained package, it's hard to know, why is this unmaintained, right? Mm-hmm. Is it unmaintained just because it's done? Is it unmaintained because the maintainer got a different job? We can actually go do that legwork and we can surface that to our customers, right? So we can tell them, this is actually a feature we rolled out pretty recently, where we can say, like, this is unmaintained because the maintainer dropped off the face of the planet and we can't find them, right? Or in one unfortunate case, this is unmaintained because the maintainer went to jail. That's a reality that you can't find that from GitHub, right? Like, that's not a metadata field in the package manager. and our, in our relationship to the maintainers, or in some cases the lack of relationship, because we've reached out to them and they've said, like, I threw all my computers in a lake, which is roughly what happened with that the two-factor authentication guy. We can help establish that baseline and surface that to customers in a way that nobody else can, because they're just not talking to I love these projects. There's a pile of projects out there that will claim to tell you, like, oh, this is the security posture of this package based on this deep analysis of GitHub, based on this deep analysis of the package manager.
Our LLM said, yeah.
Our LLM said, and some of those are surfacing pretty interesting information, but by and large, nothing beats, like, just picking up the phone and calling the maintainer, being like, hey, like, is this just done? Or have you rage quit all of society and gone to live in a cave? Which, to be clear, totally reasonable reaction to our modern technology. Definitely have considered it myself. So, no judgment, but it's good for us to know.
Yeah. Well, I want to jump back to then the other side of the equation too, a little bit what John was touching on the government, but also corporations, because we're talking about, for the maintainers, here's money, here's support to do what you perhaps love to do or want to be supported so that you don't burn out on it. But the benefits for the corporations, how do you pitch to them, and how do you say, hey, give some money? Because we actually had an interview a couple episodes ago with a open source project who a company with, I can't remember, but it was on the order of like $100 million of annual revenue was just using it. And it was a thank you and a nice, small donation to say your open source project is wonderful. We're making money off it. So how do you get corporations to support this and get them buy-in?
A couple things. We tie deeply into their existing security tooling, typically, so that we can surface that kind of like end-of-life information filtered, so higher signal CVE information, because again, we're actually talking with the maintainers about it. Higher signal licensing information, because look, as somebody who made a living off of license metadata for a long time, so many of the license scanners are just a miserable mess of false positives.
Oh, dear.
False positives sort of, nobody wants a false negative. So therefore, everybody says they want a lot of false positives, but they don't actually want the false positives either. That is one of the things from my licensing-centric background that when I came over into a more security-focused company, that translated real well, right? Like, I got that intuition very, very clearly. This is the long-term sustainability, right? You show companies how many things you have that are unmaintained, and you say, and how much pain, they know how much pain we had to port from my friend group chat this morning where I'm the only lawyer and everybody else is still a programmer or manager programmers. There's a huge thread this morning that I woke up to of, we had to update Vercel, and that meant we had to update the this and the that and the that and the that. And like companies rather get it that this is a pain point, but we've sort of internalized that that's just inevitable. And so part of what we're selling is like, no, actually it's not inevitable. we can help you get this right from the beginning. Though I think also, that's the hardest. The flip side of that is that honestly, some of our hardest sales challenge is just, it's so internalized. After the whole industry has been built this way, we're just like, of course this stuff is going to blow up under our feet. Of course it's going to, it's like, no, we can do better. But that's like a hard, when you've internalized that message for so long, that's a hard thing to change the mindset around.
Yeah. I know we're running out of time, but I've been poking around your guys' website as we've been talking here. You've got a section which is really interesting to me. We're very into, or at least I'm very into, when like the DBIR and different reports come out, like either what's the popular languages or where are the attacks coming, or sort of those type of stats. And you've got this section on there to talking about, is your package eligible for income from Tidelift? And you break it down across Cargo, Maven, NPM, Pippi, Ruby Gems, a bunch of these big repositories. First, interesting to see that Maven has the most number of packages with income. Yeah. But then as you go further down this page, you can actually click on, it looks like top 5 for each of these repos, and see what Tidelift would pay for them. So for our listeners, I think that's just sort of interesting. Click and go through and play with it. It's a neat little trick. But what was interesting to see in there is I click around, some of the languages have a way higher offer than others.
Yeah.
So
that's based on our customer usage.
Exactly. So any comments around that from what you're seeing? Like, is there one language? I'm guessing the Java stuff, but is there one area where people are more, how will we say, maybe desperate to help there than others? Or
Java is used heavily in really conservative, risk-averse institutions. And so it is maybe no surprise that those same kinds of institutions are willing to pay for something that mitigates their risk in a way that, look, we're a Rails startup ourselves. The average Rails startup is like, we are moving fast and things are just going to be a little broken. And that's, and so they are not big in the market for let me work with the Ruby maintainers. That's not, whereas Java is big banks, governments that I already mentioned, insurance companies, and they really get the message of we're in this for the long term. And boy, it's as a user of banks and insurance myself and governments, it's really satisfying when we get to say this package is 22 years old and some of the stuff you see in there is just, it's scary how many of those customers have packages that haven't gotten auto-upgraded because somewhere in their system is a version of the package that is so old that it predates the current Java naming scheme. So for those of you who are Java people, right, it's com.companyname.whatever, right, or org.apache, org.eclipse. Many of the institutions, not going to name any names, many of the institutions that your life depends on are running Java packages that predate that naming scheme. And so they haven't auto-upgraded the Apache thing that actually has had years and years of updates because they're just they're looking for org.apache and they've got versions that predate org.apache as a naming scheme.
Crazy.
Well, we've seen some Fortran being transpiled into WASM and Pascal, so maybe we'll see Java turn into WASM in the future. Who knows?
I gotta say, I think one of those things is a lot of the AI stuff is overhyped, but the idea of using AI to move some of those old code bases into more maintainable, more modern languages. There's obviously challenges and problems there, but boy, if you told younger me that, when I was in a CS department, they're oh yeah, this C that you really hate, we can transpile it into Java. Speaking of old versions of Java, that's when I was a comp sci student. It's such a cool application, right? It'll be interesting to see if that actually takes off for some of these old code bases or not. That's definitely, John, just one other thing that I thought of while you were listing some of those platforms. You won't see your C or C or C++ there because there's not, we pretty much rely on the existence of a central package manager and naming scheme. And C and C++ just don't have that. And that is a challenge for the world, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Akira, you were going to try to get in a word edgewise?
Oh, no, I was just agreeing.
Then we all agree here that a programmer turned lawyer can be pretty informative. This comes from a programmer turned podcaster, so I think you've raised at least a little bit higher on that list for us. But Luis, this was very helpful, and I think what was interesting to me is we talked about a lot of the social aspect, the economic aspects that do lead into the software supply chain. How do we have more supported, secure, open source tools without having to talk about CVEs or very specific vulnerabilities? So I appreciate that. You mentioned a couple things that I think our listeners can go and find out more of what you and some of your peers are talking about. So before I let you leave, we are asking all of our guests to help us fill out basically create a yearbook, if you will. If you could help us fill out this phrase, AppSec is most likely to what?
Get eaten by open source, because everything these days is eaten by open source. It's a snake that eats its own tail. But as we've been talking about for the past half hour, but it is inevitably centered on open source.
Well, open source is pretty tasty, and AppSec is not so tasty. So I hope open source wins that battle. But thank you again, Luis.
Thank you all for having me. Really appreciate it.
I want to say thank you to Kira and John as well. And thank you for everyone who has joined us. Stick around for interviews with Don Plotnick from Apiro about making ASPM effective for teams, and Erez Hassan from Imperva about dealing with malicious bots. And remember to subscribe, share on the socials, check out the show notes. And speaking of cool things, check out Sky City by Stills. We'll see you next time on Application Security Weekly.